The morning sun was shining brightly over Riverside Park on that Saturday in early spring. Birds were singing in the tall oak trees that lined the walking paths. Children were laughing and playing on the colorful playground equipment, while their parents sat on wooden benches watching them with smiles on their faces. The air smelled fresh and clean after the rain from the night before. Flowers were blooming in the carefully maintained garden beds that surrounded the main walking area. Mrs. Chen walked slowly along the main path, holding a thin blue leash in her wrinkled hand. At the other end of the leash was Buddy, her 8-year-old golden retriever, who had been her best friend since her husband died 3 years ago. Buddy was a small dog for his breed, with soft golden fur that gleamed in the sunlight. His tail wagged constantly as he walked beside his owner, and his brown eyes sparkled with happiness and curiosity about everything around him. The elderly woman was wearing a light blue sweater and comfortable walking shoes. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she carried a small brown purse over her shoulder. She walked carefully because arthritis in her knees made it difficult for her to move quickly. But she never missed her daily walk with Buddy because it was the highlight of both their days. They had been coming to this park every morning for 3 years, and they knew all the regular dog walkers and joggers who used the same paths. Buddy loved meeting other dogs during their walks. He would wag his tail excitedly whenever he saw another pet, and he always behaved well when Mrs. Chen let him say hello to the other animals. The little dog was gentle and friendly with everyone he met. Children often asked their parents if they could pet Buddy, and Mrs. Chen always said yes, because she knew her dog would never hurt anyone. Buddy seemed to understand that he needed to be extra careful around small children, and he would sit very still while they petted his soft fur. The park was busy that morning with the usual weekend crowd. Families had spread blankets on the grass for picnics. Some people were flying colorful kites in the open field area. A group of teenagers was playing frisbee near the pond where ducks swam peacefully. Joggers ran along the paved paths wearing bright athletic clothes and listening to music through their headphones. Everything felt normal and peaceful in the way that weekend mornings in the park always did. Mrs. Chen stopped to rest on her favorite bench near the rose garden. Buddy sat down beside her and panted lightly from their walk. The old woman reached into her purse and pulled out a small water bottle and a collapsible bowl. She poured some water for Buddy, who lapped it up gratefully. While he drank, Mrs. Chen looked around at all the happy families enjoying their morning in the park. She felt grateful for this peaceful place where she and Buddy could spend time together. A young mother pushed her baby in a stroller past their bench and smiled at Mrs. Chen. The woman recognized them from their daily walks and waved hello. Mrs. Chen waved back and felt the warm feeling she always got from being part of this community of park visitors who had become like neighbors to her over the years. But as Mrs. Chen and Buddy prepared to continue their walk, something was about to happen that would change their peaceful morning forever. In the distance, the sound of motorcycle engines could be heard growing louder and louder. The sound was harsh and aggressive, completely different from the gentle sounds of the park. Birds stopped singing and flew away from the trees. Children stopped playing and looked toward the sound with worried expressions. Even the ducks on the pond seemed nervous and swam toward the far shore. Mrs. Chen felt Buddy tense up beside her as the motorcycle sounds got closer and closer to their quiet corner of the world. The peaceful atmosphere of Riverside Park was suddenly shattered by the roar of 5 motorcycles racing through the main entrance. The bikes were loud and powerful, with chrome exhaust pipes that made thunderous noise as the riders revved their engines. Black smoke poured out behind them as they sped across the grass areas where families had been enjoying their picnics just moments before. The 5 bikers were young men in their 20s wearing black leather jackets covered with metal studs and patches. Their motorcycles were painted in dark colors with flame designs on the gas tanks. They wore no helmets, and their long hair flew behind them as they raced around the park at dangerous speeds. The leader of the group was a tall man with tattoos covering both of his muscular arms. His bike was the loudest of all, and he seemed to enjoy making as much noise as possible. People scattered in every direction as the motorcycles tore through the park. Parents grabbed their children and pulled them away from the playground equipment. The teenagers playing frisbee ran toward the trees for safety. Picnic blankets were abandoned as families hurried to get out of the way of the speeding bikes. The peaceful morning had turned into chaos in just a few seconds. The bikers seemed to think this was all very funny. They laughed and shouted to each other as they raced in circles around the main field. They drove through flower beds, crushing the beautiful plants that park workers had spent weeks planting and caring for. They scared the ducks on the pond so badly that the birds flew away in a panic. They knocked over trash cans and scattered garbage across the walking paths. Mrs. Chen stood up from her bench and tried to move away from the approaching motorcycles, but her arthritis made it difficult for her to walk quickly. Buddy stayed close to her side, but the little dog was confused and frightened by all the loud noise and commotion. His ears were pressed flat against his head, and he was panting heavily from stress and fear. The lead biker noticed the elderly woman and her small dog trying to get out of the way. Instead of slowing down or going around them, he seemed to think it would be fun to race even closer to them. He gunned his engine and rode straight toward Mrs. Chen and Buddy, only swerving away at the last second. The old woman stumbled and nearly fell, but she managed to keep her balance while holding tightly to Buddy's leash. Other park visitors watched in horror as the bikers continued their dangerous behavior. Several people pulled out their cell phones to call the police, but the bikers didn't seem worried about getting in trouble. They acted like they owned the park and could do whatever they wanted. They rode up onto the walking paths where people had been jogging peacefully just minutes before. They did wheelies on their bikes, lifting the front wheels high into the air and showing off for each other. The noise from their engines was so loud that it hurt people's ears. Car alarms in the nearby parking lot started going off because of the vibrations from the motorcycles. The beautiful, peaceful sounds of the park had been replaced by mechanical roaring and the shouts of the troublemaking bikers who seemed determined to ruin everyone's morning. Mrs. Chen tried to find a safe place to wait until the bikers left, but they seemed to be everywhere at once. Every time she thought she had found a quiet corner of the park, one of the motorcycles would come racing past, sending her and Buddy scrambling for safety again. The little dog was shaking with fear, and Mrs. Chen felt her heart beating rapidly from the stress and anxiety of trying to protect her beloved pet from these dangerous strangers who had invaded their peaceful world. The other park visitors were just as frightened and angry as Mrs. Chen, but no one knew what to do about the situation because the bikers were bigger and stronger than most of the families who had come to the park for a quiet morning of relaxation and fun. The group of bikers had been terrorizing the park for nearly 10 minutes when disaster struck. Mrs. Chen was trying to lead Buddy toward the parking lot where she hoped they would be safe from the dangerous motorcycles. But the little golden retriever was so frightened and confused by all the noise and chaos that he wasn't paying attention to where he was walking. As they moved along one of the main paths, Buddy suddenly saw a squirrel run across the grass nearby. Even though he was scared, his natural dog instincts made him want to chase after the small animal. Before Mrs. Chen could stop him, Buddy pulled on his leash and stepped directly into the path where the lead biker was racing his motorcycle at full speed. The tall man with tattoos on his arms had to swerve his bike sharply to avoid hitting the small dog. His motorcycle skidded sideways on the grass, and he almost lost control of the powerful machine. When he managed to stop his bike and put his feet down on the ground, his face was red with anger. The other 4 bikers stopped their motorcycles nearby and waited to see what their leader would do. Instead of being grateful that he hadn't hurt an innocent animal, the lead biker became furious. He jumped off his motorcycle and started walking toward Mrs. Chen with his hands clenched into fists. His voice was loud and harsh as he began yelling at the elderly woman. He blamed her for not controlling her dog properly. He said she was too old to be walking a pet if she couldn't keep it out of his way. Mrs. Chen tried to apologize and explain that Buddy was usually very well behaved, but the angry man wouldn't listen to her. The other park visitors who had been watching from a safe distance began moving closer to see what was happening. Some of them started taking pictures and videos with their phones, hoping to record evidence of the bikers' bad behavior. But before anyone could intervene or help Mrs. Chen, The lead biker did something that shocked everyone who witnessed it. He pulled back his heavy black boot and kicked Buddy as hard as he could in the side. The small dog let out a terrible yelping sound as the force of the kick lifted him completely off the ground and sent him flying through the air. Buddy landed hard on the grass several feet away from where he had been standing. The little dog tried to get up, but he couldn't put any weight on his right front leg. He whimpered in pain and looked around with frightened eyes, trying to understand what had happened to him. His golden fur was dirty from rolling on the ground, and he was breathing rapidly from shock and pain. Mrs. Chen screamed and ran to her injured pet as fast as her arthritic legs would carry her. She knelt down beside Buddy and gently touched his head while tears streamed down her face. The little dog looked up at her with trust and love in his brown eyes, even though he was clearly hurt and scared. The lead biker and his 4 friends showed no remorse for what they had done. They actually seemed to think the whole situation was funny. They laughed and made jokes about the injured dog and the crying elderly woman. One of them said that maybe next time she would keep her stupid pet out of their way. Another one suggested that they should kick a few more dogs to teach all the pet owners in the park a lesson. The crowd of park visitors who had gathered to watch couldn't believe what they were seeing. Parents covered their children's eyes so they wouldn't have to witness such cruelty. Several people were openly crying as they watched Mrs. Chen trying to comfort her injured pet. Others were shaking with anger at the biker's heartless behavior. But even though everyone was upset and wanted to help, most of the park visitors were too frightened of the 5 tough-looking bikers to do anything about the situation. Word about what had happened to Buddy spread quickly throughout Riverside Park. People who had been in other areas of the park started walking over to see what all the commotion was about. Within minutes, a crowd of more than 30 people had gathered around Mrs. Chen and her injured dog. The circle of concerned park visitors provided some protection from the 5 bikers, who were still standing nearby with their motorcycles. A woman in jogging clothes knelt down beside Mrs. Chen and offered to help examine Buddy's injuries. She explained that she was a nurse at the local hospital and had some basic first aid training for animals as well as people. With gentle hands, she carefully felt along Buddy's ribs and legs to check for broken bones. The little dog whimpered softly but seemed to understand that the woman was trying to help him. The nurse determined that Buddy probably had some bruised ribs and a sprained leg, but she didn't think any bones were broken. She asked if anyone had a water bottle so she could clean the dirt and grass stains from the dog's golden fur. Several people immediately offered their water bottles, and someone else provided a clean towel from their picnic supplies. A man with a cell phone told Mrs. Chen that he had already called the police and that they should arrive within the next few minutes. He also offered to call an animal hospital to make sure they would be ready to examine Buddy properly. The elderly woman thanked him through her tears and gave him the name of the veterinarian who had been taking care of Buddy since he was a puppy. The crowd of supporters made the 5 bikers nervous and angry. They had expected to intimidate everyone in the park, but instead they found themselves outnumbered by people who were clearly upset about what they had done. The lead biker tried to get everyone to leave by revving his motorcycle engine loudly and making threatening gestures with his fists. But the park visitors refused to be scared away from Mrs. Chen and Buddy. A group of fathers positioned themselves between the bikers and the injured dog. Several mothers were taking pictures and videos of the bikers' faces so they could provide evidence to the police. Teenagers were posting updates about the situation on social media to let their friends know what was happening at the park. The bikers realized that their bullying tactics weren't working on this crowd of determined people. They tried a different approach and began claiming that what happened was just an accident. The lead biker said that Buddy had run in front of his motorcycle and that he had only been trying to move the dog out of the way with his foot. He insisted that he hadn't meant to hurt the animal. But too many people had seen exactly what happened, and no one believed the biker's lies. Several witnesses spoke up to say that they had watched him deliberately kick the small dog after his motorcycle was already stopped, and there was no danger of an accident. The crowd became even more angry when they realized that the bikers were trying to lie their way out of trouble instead of taking responsibility for their cruel actions. A retired police officer who had been walking his own dog in the park stepped forward and began questioning the bikers about their names and addresses. He explained that he would need this information to include in his report about the incident. The bikers became defensive and refused to provide any personal information. They said they didn't have to answer questions from someone who wasn't a real cop anymore. The tension in the air was growing thicker by the minute. The crowd of park visitors was getting more upset and angry, while the bikers were becoming more defensive and aggressive. Mrs. Chen continued to hold Buddy gently in her arms, trying to keep him calm while they waited for help to arrive. The little dog seemed to sense that all these people were trying to protect him, and he stopped whimpering as much. Just when it seemed like the situation might turn into a real confrontation between the angry crowd and the 5 bikers, everyone heard the sound of another motorcycle approaching from the park entrance. This engine sounded different from the bikers' loud machines. It had a deep, steady rumble that seemed more controlled and purposeful. The sound of the approaching motorcycle was completely different from the harsh, aggressive noise that the 5 troublemakers had been making all morning. This engine had a deep, steady rhythm that suggested power under control rather than reckless showing off. Everyone in the crowd turned to look toward the park entrance where the sound was coming from. A single rider appeared on the main path, moving slowly and deliberately toward the scene of the confrontation. The motorcycle was a classic model, well-maintained but not flashy like the bikes belonging to the troublemakers. It was painted in simple black with chrome details that gleamed in the morning sunlight. The bike looked like it belonged to someone who rode for practical reasons rather than to intimidate other people. The rider was wearing a plain black leather jacket that looked worn but well cared for. A black helmet covered the person's head and face, making it impossible to tell who was underneath. The mysterious rider's posture was relaxed and confident as the motorcycle moved steadily closer to where everyone was gathered around Mrs. Chen and Buddy. The 5 troublemaking bikers stopped their loud talking and posturing as they watched the newcomer approach. Something about the way this person rode commanded respect, even though they weren't doing anything aggressive or showy. The steady rumble of the engine seemed to fill the air with a sense of authority that made everyone pay attention. The rider brought the motorcycle to a smooth stop about 20 feet away from the crowd. The engine was turned off, and suddenly the park seemed very quiet after all the noise and chaos of the past half hour. The rider remained seated on the bike for a moment, looking around at the scene with what seemed like careful assessment of the situation. When the rider finally dismounted from the motorcycle, every movement was smooth and purposeful. The person was clearly tall and strongly built, but there was nothing threatening about the way they moved. Instead, there was a sense of calm confidence that suggested someone who was completely comfortable in any situation and didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The rider reached up and slowly removed the black helmet, shaking out shoulder-length dark hair that was streaked with gray. As the helmet came off, gasps could be heard from several people in the crowd who recognized the face that was revealed. Even some of the troublemaking bikers looked surprised and uncertain as they realized who had just arrived at their confrontation. The rider set the helmet down carefully on the motorcycle seat and began walking toward the group of people surrounding Mrs. Chen and her injured dog. Each step was measured and deliberate, and the person's eyes were focused on assessing the situation rather than on any individual person. There was something about this newcomer's presence that made everyone feel like the balance of power had suddenly shifted. The 5 troublemaking bikers huddled together and began whispering nervously among themselves. They seemed to recognize the person who had just arrived, and whatever they knew about this individual was making them much less confident than they had been just minutes before. The lead biker who had kicked Buddy was no longer standing with his chest puffed out and his fists clenched. Instead, he was looking around as if he was thinking about getting back on his motorcycle and leaving the park as quickly as possible. The crowd of park visitors also seemed to sense that something important was happening, but most of them didn't know who the mysterious rider was. They watched with curiosity and hope as this calm, confident person approached the scene where Mrs. Chen was still holding her injured pet. Many of them were hoping that this newcomer might be able to help resolve the situation in a way that would bring justice for what had happened to poor Buddy. The rider stopped a few feet away from Mrs. Chen and knelt down to get a better look at the injured dog. Buddy looked up with his brown eyes and seemed to sense that this person meant no harm. His tail gave a small, tentative wag as the stranger reached out a gentle hand to lightly touch his golden fur. When the rider stood up and turned to face the 5 troublemaking bikers, everyone in the crowd could see that this was someone who was completely unafraid and ready to handle whatever came next. The man who had just removed his helmet and was now walking toward the confrontation was Marcus Rodriguez, a name that everyone in the city knew and respected. 20 years ago, Marcus had been the heavyweight boxing champion of the entire state. His picture had been on the front page of newspapers, and his fights had been broadcast on television to thousands of viewers who cheered for their local hero. Marcus was now 52 years old, and his thick black hair was streaked with silver gray. His face showed the lines that come with age and experience, but his dark brown eyes were still sharp and alert. He stood 6 feet tall and weighed about 200 pounds, with the broad shoulders and muscled arms of someone who had spent years training as a professional athlete. Even though he had been retired from boxing for more than a decade, it was clear that he had stayed in excellent physical condition. But Marcus Rodriguez was much more than just a former boxing champion. After retiring from the ring, he had become one of the most respected community leaders in the entire city. He volunteered at local schools, teaching children about the importance of hard work and staying away from drugs and gangs. He organized charity events to raise money for families who couldn't afford food or medical care. He coached youth boxing at the community center, always emphasizing discipline and respect, rather than just fighting. Marcus had grown up in the neighborhood surrounding Riverside Park. As a child, he had played on the same playground equipment where families brought their children every weekend. He had learned to ride his first bicycle on these same paths where people now walked their dogs and jogged for exercise. This park held so many memories for him that he considered it almost like his second home. After he became successful as a boxer, Marcus never forgot where he came from. He bought a house just a few blocks from the park, so he could continue to be part of the community that had supported him throughout his career. He brought his own children to play in this park when they were young, and now he sometimes brought his grandchildren to the same playground where he had once played as a boy. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Marcus Rodriguez and respected him deeply. Store owners would wave and smile when he walked past their shops. Children would run up to him on the street and ask for his autograph. Police officers knew they could count on his help when there were problems in the community. Even people who had never met him personally knew his reputation as someone who always stood up for what was right. The 5 troublemaking bikers were starting to look very nervous as they realized who was now involved in their confrontation. The lead biker who had kicked Buddy was no longer acting tough and aggressive. His face had turned pale, and he was glancing around as if he was looking for an escape route. The other 4 bikers were whispering among themselves and seemed to be having second thoughts about their behavior. Marcus looked around at the crowd of park visitors who were still surrounding Mrs. Chen and her injured dog. He nodded respectfully to the people he recognized from the neighborhood. Then he turned his attention to Mrs. Chen, who was still kneeling on the grass holding Buddy in her arms. His expression became gentle and concerned as he approached the elderly woman and her pet. He knelt down beside Mrs. Chen and spoke to her in a soft, kind voice. He asked if she was hurt and if there was anything he could do to help her and Buddy. The old woman looked up at him with grateful tears in her eyes and explained what had happened. Marcus listened carefully to every word, his face becoming more serious as he heard about the cruel way the bikers had treated an innocent animal and a defenseless elderly person. When Mrs. Chen finished telling her story, Marcus gently petted Buddy's head and whispered something comforting to the injured dog. Then he stood up slowly and turned to face the 5 bikers who were responsible for causing so much pain and fear in his beloved park. The confrontation that everyone had been waiting for was about to begin. Marcus Rodriguez walked slowly toward the group of 5 bikers with his hands relaxed at his sides and his expression calm but serious. He didn't hurry or make any threatening gestures, but there was something about his confident posture and steady gaze that made it clear he was completely in control of the situation. The crowd of park visitors watched in fascination as their local hero approached the troublemakers who had been terrorizing everyone just minutes before. When Marcus stopped about 6 feet away from the lead biker, the difference between the two men was obvious to everyone watching. The biker was younger and taller, with tattoos and leather clothing meant to make him look dangerous and intimidating. But Marcus had the quiet confidence that comes from years of facing real challenges and earning genuine respect from his community. He didn't need to try to look tough, because everyone already knew what he was capable of doing. Marcus spoke to the lead biker in a voice that was calm and controlled but carried clearly to everyone in the crowd. He said that what they had done to Mrs. Chen and her dog was completely unacceptable behavior that would not be tolerated in his park. He explained that they had frightened children, destroyed property, and seriously injured an innocent animal. He told them that they needed to apologize immediately to Mrs. Chen and offer to pay for all of Buddy's medical expenses. The lead biker tried to maintain his tough attitude, even though it was obvious that he was nervous about facing Marcus Rodriguez. He laughed and said that he didn't have to listen to some old man who thought he was still important, just because he used to be a boxer 20 years ago. He claimed that what happened to the dog was an accident and that they didn't owe anyone an apology or any money. Marcus listened to the biker's words without changing his expression or raising his voice. When the younger man finished talking, Marcus simply asked him if he was sure that was how he wanted to handle the situation. There was something in the way Marcus asked this question that made all 5 bikers look at each other with uncertainty. The quiet confidence in his voice suggested that he knew something they didn't know about what was going to happen next. The other 4 bikers began whispering among themselves and seemed to be trying to convince their leader to be more reasonable. They had recognized Marcus Rodriguez immediately, and they understood that they were no longer dealing with helpless park visitors who could be easily intimidated. They were facing someone who had spent his entire life preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation. But the lead biker was too proud and stubborn to back down in front of his friends and all the people who were watching. He took a step closer to Marcus and began making threats about what would happen if the former boxer didn't mind his own business and leave them alone. He said that there were 5 of them, and only one of Marcus, and that maybe it was time for the old champion to learn that his fighting days were over. Marcus continued to stand calmly with his hands at his sides, but everyone could see that he was ready for whatever might happen next. His feet were positioned in the balanced stance of a trained fighter, and his eyes never left the lead biker's face. He had faced much more dangerous opponents than this bully during his boxing career, and he wasn't intimidated by the young man's threats. The tension in the air was so thick that everyone could feel it. The crowd of park visitors held their breath as they waited to see what would happen between the respected community leader and the aggressive troublemaker who had hurt an innocent animal. Parents moved their children further back to keep them safe, but no one wanted to leave because they all wanted to see justice done for Mrs. Chen and Buddy. Even the injured dog seemed to sense that something important was happening. Buddy lifted his head from where he was resting in Mrs. Chen's arms and looked toward Marcus with his intelligent brown eyes. It was almost as if the little golden retriever understood that this calm, confident man was there to help him and his beloved owner. The lead biker made his final mistake when he decided to try to punch Marcus Rodriguez in the face. The lead biker drew back his right fist and threw a hard punch directly at Marcus Rodriguez's face. But the former heavyweight champion had been expecting this move from the moment the confrontation began. With reflexes that were still lightning fast despite his age, Marcus stepped slightly to his left and caught the biker's wrist in his strong right hand. In one smooth, practiced motion that took less than 2 seconds, Marcus twisted the biker's arm behind his back and gently but firmly guided him face down onto the grass. The young man found himself completely helpless before he even understood what had happened to him. Marcus had used just enough force to control the situation without causing any real injury to his opponent. Marcus knelt beside the subdued biker and spoke quietly into his ear so that only the two of them could hear what was being said. Whatever Marcus whispered to the young man made his face turn completely white with fear. The former boxing champion's words were calm and measured, but they clearly contained information that changed the biker's entire attitude about the situation. After speaking privately for about 30 seconds, Marcus helped the lead biker to his feet and brushed the grass and dirt off his leather jacket. The young man's aggressive posture had completely disappeared, and he was now looking down at the ground like a child who had been caught doing something wrong. His hands were shaking slightly, and he seemed to have trouble making eye contact with anyone in the crowd. The other four bikers had watched their leader's quick defeat with shock and growing fear. They realized that their friend's reputation as a tough guy meant nothing when he was facing someone with real fighting experience and training. They began backing away from Marcus and looking toward their motorcycles as if they were thinking about escaping from the park as quickly as possible. But Marcus wasn't finished with them yet. He walked over to the group of four remaining bikers and spoke to them in the same calm, controlled voice he had used with their leader. He explained that they were all equally responsible for what had happened to Mrs. Chen and Buddy. He told them that they had two choices about how this situation could end. Their first choice was to apologize sincerely to Mrs. Chen, provide their real names and contact information, pay for all of Buddy's medical expenses, and volunteer to spend 50 hours doing community service work in the park. If they chose this option, Marcus would consider the matter settled and wouldn't involve the police in what had happened. Their second choice was to refuse to take responsibility for their actions. If they made this choice, Marcus would make sure that the police arrested all five of them for animal cruelty, destruction of public property, reckless endangerment, and several other serious charges. He explained that he had many friends in the police department who would be very interested in hearing about what had happened in the park that morning. The five bikers huddled together and discussed their options in urgent whispers. It didn't take them long to realize that Marcus Rodriguez was offering them a way out of serious legal trouble in exchange for doing the right thing. Within 5 minutes, all five young men had agreed to his terms and were walking over to where Mrs. Chen was still holding her injured pet. The lead biker, who just minutes before had been making threats and acting tough, now approached the elderly woman with his head down in shame. His voice was quiet and sincere as he apologized for kicking Buddy and frightening her. He promised that he would pay for all the dog's medical bills and that nothing like this would ever happen again. The other four bikers also apologized and provided their names, phone numbers, and addresses to Mrs. Chen and to several people in the crowd who were serving as witnesses. They promised to report to the park supervisor the following Monday morning to begin their community service work. As the five motorcycles left the park quietly and slowly, everyone could see that Marcus Rodriguez had accomplished something remarkable. He had brought justice to the situation without anyone getting seriously hurt and without the need for police arrests or court proceedings. After the five bikers had left the park with their promises to make things right, Marcus Rodriguez turned his full attention to Mrs. Chen and her injured pet. The tough exterior that he had shown during the confrontation with the troublemakers melted away completely as he knelt down beside the elderly woman and her small golden retriever. Marcus spoke to Mrs. Chen in a gentle, caring voice that was completely different from the firm tone he had used with the bikers. He asked detailed questions about Buddy's condition and examined the dog's injuries with surprisingly knowledgeable hands. The crowd of park visitors was amazed to learn that Marcus had worked part-time as a veterinary assistant during his boxing career to earn extra money between fights. Marcus carefully felt along Buddy's ribs and legs, checking for signs of serious injury that might not be immediately obvious. The little dog seemed to trust this kind stranger instinctively and remained calm, even when Marcus touched the areas where he had been kicked. After his examination, Marcus told Mrs. Chen that he believed Buddy's injuries were painful but not life-threatening. However, he strongly recommended that they take the dog to a veterinarian right away for x-rays and proper treatment. Without being asked, Marcus gently lifted Buddy in his strong arms and carried the injured dog toward his motorcycle. Mrs. Chen was worried about how they would get Buddy to the animal hospital since she didn't drive and had planned to walk home from the park that morning. Marcus smiled and told her not to worry because he would give both of them a ride to the veterinary clinic on his motorcycle. Mrs. Chen had never ridden on a motorcycle before and was nervous about the idea, but she trusted Marcus completely after seeing how he had handled the dangerous situation with the bikers. Marcus helped her onto the back seat of his bike and showed her how to hold on safely. Then he carefully positioned Buddy in a specially designed pet carrier that he kept attached to his motorcycle for exactly this kind of emergency. The ride to the animal hospital took only 10 minutes, but it felt much longer to Mrs. Chen as she worried about her beloved pet. Marcus drove very carefully and slowly, avoiding bumps and turns that might cause Buddy additional pain. He spoke reassuring words to both Mrs. Chen and her dog throughout the journey, helping them stay calm during the stressful trip. At the veterinary clinic, Marcus carried Buddy inside and explained the situation to the staff. He made sure that Mrs. Chen had everything she needed and offered to wait with her during Buddy's examination and treatment. The veterinarian confirmed Marcus's assessment that the dog had bruised ribs and a sprained leg, but no broken bones or internal injuries. While they waited for Buddy to be treated, Marcus and Mrs. Chen sat together in the clinic's waiting room and talked about their shared love for the park where they had met that morning. Mrs. Chen learned that Marcus visited Riverside Park almost every day, either to exercise or to check on the community service projects he had organized there. She was amazed to discover that this famous former boxer was also responsible for many of the improvements that had been made to the park over the years. Marcus learned that Mrs. Chen had been bringing Buddy to the park every morning since her husband died 3 years ago. The daily walks with her dog had become her most important source of companionship and exercise. He promised her that she would never have to worry about troublemakers bothering her in the park again, because he would make sure that word spread throughout the community about what had happened that morning. When Buddy was released from the veterinary clinic with his leg in a small bandage and instructions for his care, Marcus gave Mrs. Chen and her pet another careful ride back to her apartment building. He helped carry Buddy upstairs to her home and made sure she had his phone number in case she needed any help during the dog's recovery. Over the following weeks, Marcus stopped by Mrs. Chen's apartment regularly to check on Buddy's progress and to walk with them in the park once the dog was feeling better. The three of them became close friends, and Mrs. Chen often said that meeting Marcus Rodriguez had been like having a guardian angel appear in her life exactly when she needed one most. The story of what happened that morning in Riverside Park spread throughout the community and became a legend that people told for years afterward. It reminded everyone that real strength isn't about bullying people who are weaker than you, but about using your power to protect those who can't protect themselves.